Well, for more on the challenges facing journalism, we're joined by Media Monitoring Africa Director William Bird. William, good evening to you. It's almost ironic, right? Because when we look at the digital media and the platform, the opportunity it was supposed to create and it has created, that of course has also been followed and marred by some of the dangers that are lurking in the background that threaten media freedom in and of itself.
Yeah, we do face that complete opposite extremes kind of scenario. It's a little bit schizophrenic, actually, if you like, because on the one hand, if you look at something like the conflict in Ukraine, you can see there that having people on the ground, journalists there are able to bring us places, visuals, things that we would otherwise not have been able to get. You can see streams of that on social media. It means that can be verified through open source networks all around the world. And that kind of ability is really remarkable, and it then empowers and makes that reporting even more powerful and lends it greater credibility. At the same time, though, you've got that complete opposite where you see it being intentionally and deliberately used to undermine media and media freedom. And usually, at the moment in South Africa, for example, you're seeing this kind of rise of xenophobia and this idea that the media are some part of an evil plot to promote foreigners and steal jobs. And it's this idea of using mis and disinformation to undermine credibility, and then in so doing undermine democracy as well.
One of the concerning things, particularly around what is happening in the digital space, I'll get to the attacks and then the confrontations that journalists have to face, but I want us to speak about surveillance, William, and how we're seeing an increase of surveillance of journalists that is not only putting their lives at risk, their personal information at risk, but also, is putting at risk whistleblowers, which could have, dire consequences going forward, because if whistleblowers are too afraid to come forward with information, we all know how that story ends.
Yeah, and so it's those surveillance mechanisms, and of course the difficulty with being able to, digital is great in so many respects, but it also often means you leave a footprint in some way, shape or form, and very often states are using the latest kind of technology or these kind of very interesting kind of private entities that allow you to track and follow different individuals and the kind of content and try and trace things back. So it is making things a lot more difficult for whistleblowers. Then again, the challenge that whistleblowers face in South Africa and indeed around the world is one that it's they're often forced into an impossible position where they have to reveal things, and they know that their lives are not going to be the same once they do make that usually very brave decision. But certainly digital can make that a lot easier, but it also tends to make it a lot harder to actually come clean when there are lots and lots of ways of tracking. If you move with your mobile device, that's it. So often you have to rely on journalists going old school, where they go and they'll meet somewhere with no devices anywhere near them, and they'll resort to pen and paper.
Let's talk about the attacks on different digital platforms. I don't want to say cyber attacks, because that is, it takes on a completely different meaning. What have we found to be the impact of that on the work that journalists are actually doing? You used a great example earlier of, many journalists being labeled as being anti-South African due to the conversation that is taking place in this country around immigration.
In the old days, it used to be quite easy to kind of identify who those bad people were, right? Often the state would go around to the journalists, so they'd come into Newzroom Afrika's studio with, men usually with guns, and they'd say, okay, Kathy, please stop this broadcast or else. And then you could see who they were. Nowadays, effectively, they're able to do the same kind of thing, but you don't know who they are. They can hide behind things, and they can be, all over the place. And their tactics and techniques are getting more and more kind of nuanced, so that you'll get some that'll just critique Newzroom Afrika, for example, and attack you for the kind of position that you take. And then you'll get others that'll really start to use foul language, they'll be misogynistic, they'll be racist, there'll be all sorts of things in order to just drive that kind of more extreme kind of idea and agenda. And what that does is, as a whole, is it just starts to undermine and gets people to go, well, I'm not really sure. Do I necessarily trust this? Because what they have to do, their goal is just to get people to doubt. The moment they can get people to doubt, effectively they've started to win that battle. And that's really why it's so hazardous. Also because it's so easy for them to do this. So, journalists are really facing a huge challenge in a digital era, especially when there are even fewer resources at their disposal.
Of course, there's a lot to be said about the work that is being done by journalists, and often, that's what we hear, the critique leveled at different media houses for the work that they're doing. Often we don't talk about the state of journalists, as in the human beings themselves. The industry, William, like any other industry, has been through a devastating period, and South Africa's journalism sector has not been shielded or protected from that.
Look, I think on any ordinary day, a journalist's life is just quite incredible, and I think few people can really grasp the fact that our journalists tend to see, the most hardcore face of South Africa's or any country's reality first and forehand. Often they're there at the same time as the police or emergency services, as the army. They're there when the disaster happens. They're seeing people, they're meeting people who've just lost their loved ones. Like, just their daily core experience is already hard enough. If you then add to it the fact that there are fewer resources, that very few of them have this idea that actually they can seek support for that, plus the fact that in South Africa, our society is one that is living in permanent stress. Most of the people in South Africa have post-traumatic stress from our recent past. We've got incredibly high levels of violence. And within that, we're expecting journalists to adhere to the highest form of ethics and the highest forms of journalistic standards. So it's just about an impossible task. The fact that people still want to do this and believe in it is something that's why we really do need to say, World Press Freedom Day, it's an incredible day. We really do need to celebrate and highlight the critical and amazing importance of our journalists and the work that they do.